It is 1970-ish. You are
Hmm.
no longer an enlisted, but you are an officer and a chaplain. So
Hmm.
between the time you were enlisted and that about a 7 year span, give or take, what was the call of ministry? How did you sense the call even to go to seminary? Tell us about that time span, sir.
I was still in Turkey. I was living in a barracks. The barracks were full in those days, a lot of security guys. And I had two roommates, and so three of us per room. And Sergeant Crocker, who was the pastor of the gospel service, came and knocked on my door in the barracks. And well, he had never come in the barracks before that I knew of. And I opened the door and said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Cecil, I had a dream last night, and I saw you preaching to hundreds of people. Has God called you to be a preacher?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I think he has." But I said no, because I'm too shy, and I'm not a very good person, and not as good as I want to be. And I don't think I could ever stand before a group and talk. And I just can't do it. But Sergeant Crockett said, "Yes, you can, and I'm going to teach you." And I'd been there in Turkey about 3 months, something like that. But and I was fervent in my Bible reading and fervent in trying to turn my life around. But the very next Friday at the gospel service, we had about 40 or 50 people there. And he stood up, he began the service by standing up and saying, "Hey, everybody, I've got an announcement to make. God has called Cecil to be a preacher." And people started applauding, I'd gotten to know them. And I'm just, whoa, yeah, well. And then he said, "So come up here, Cecil." And I thought, well, what's this mean? And so I got up and I started walking. He said, "Bring your Bible." So I went back and grabbed my Bible. I'd already read my 150 chapters that day, and so I knew that it couldn't have to do anything with that, And he had me stand right beside him, and he said, "Okay, God has called you to preach, Cecil, so preach." And I just started telling people what I had read that day in the Bible, and he said, "No, not like that, like this." And then he just started preaching what I had said, but right in front of the people, and everybody's watching. He preached what I said, and he said, "I want you to learn how to do this." But he did it every single Friday night for the rest of the time that I was in Turkey.
Wow.
So about 8 or 9 months, maybe a little longer than that, he stood beside me in the gospel service, and he had me preaching. And to this day, when I'm preaching, some people will say to me, "Cecil, you kind of sound like an African American man." Well, yeah, that's how I got started.
Wow.
But then I left there and went to NSA, National Security Agency, and I did everything I could to be able to speak at different groups, to singles groups and youth groups and whatever. And then I got invited to speak in churches, but I was still active duty.
Okay.
And then by that time I was a three-striper, a sergeant actually, and it's. And as I mentioned earlier, I got invited to continue working for the National Security Agency
Yes.
and some really interesting jobs. But by then I knew God had called me to be a preacher. And so as soon as I could, I got out. I had 4 years active duty, but then I was forced to stay in the reserves for 2 more years because there was some more stuff with the intel community. And but I left at my 4-year mark, and started with Bible college, and then transferred to a Christian liberal arts college and started picking up degrees in archaeology, in Greek, in biblical studies. And after that, I went to a seminary, Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, and got my Master of Divinity, and then got a Master's in Hebrew and in archaeology. Not very focused in terms of one thing, but I just wanted to be so prepared for when God called me to ministry. And more as I went through seminary, I thought, well, I really, really would love to be a missionary. And I'd love to go to a tribe I pictured myself paddling a canoe with my wife, swatting mosquitoes, and going to a tribe where nobody knew their language, and I would learn their language, and I'd put it in writing, and then I'd translate the Bible into it. And I just couldn't imagine anything more exciting. But that's not the way God was leading me. I mean, it's what I wanted, but he had another plan. But I didn't know the plan because I just wasn't prepared. His call at that point was for me to get a Master's of Divinity degree because he knew that's what I was going to need later on. And so when I graduated, I was offered a job at a college, a Christian college, but I wanted to be some sort of hands-on ministry. And so I took a job as a youth pastor at a church. My wife and I both love, and to this day we love working with the youth. And as a youth pastor then, I just fell asleep one night and I was praying and saying, God, what is going to be my career? What do you want me to do? And it wasn't a voice or anything, but it just suddenly, I just knew he wants me to go back to where I started, back to the military. Well, when I left the military, I never wanted to go back in. Remember, I'd been drafted.
Correct.
I made $94.50 a month.
Oh my.
You know, that's what they paid back then. And I didn't want to be in the military, but then it all made sense. That's why, even though I was ordained before I went to seminary, that's why God called me so clearly to go to seminary. That's why all these things, they just came together. That's the way the Lord does stuff. And then you turn around and say, he knew all along what I was supposed to be doing. And indeed, I didn't know how to become a chaplain, so I just started making phone calls, and I got some paperwork sent to me. I filled it all out. I got the certifications that I needed, and then I got the recommendations from people, and I mailed it all in to my denominational endorser. And then something I didn't know what was going on at the time. I found out later from Chaplain Lloyd Lingdahl, who used to be the chief of personnel in the chief of chaplain's office. Chaplain Lingdahl was telling me, well, what happened, Cecil, was that we needed a female chaplain. The Congress was putting pressure on us for it. We really had a need for a female chaplain, and your denomination had a female chaplain already in the reserves who wanted to go active duty. So the chief's office, personnel office, called my denomination and said, we'd like to bring your female chaplain on board because we really need a female chaplain right now to address a lot of things. And she was awesome. But that morning they had just received my application. And so the endorser said, oh, certainly we'll do that. But we have a guy who also very qualified, and he just applied this morning. We'd like to send you both of them.
Wow.
And they said, sure, yeah, send them both on. Now at that time, that was after Vietnam when we were drawing down.
Correct.
And there's tight quotas. And there just weren't any openings. But they made an opening where there was no opening. Wow. And so I came in with Chaplain Gloria Arango. She and I entered the Air Force together. And because of her, and because the Lord needed her so badly, the Lord positioned me where he wanted me. It was a humbling moment and a powerful moment in my life, and realized that he had been working this out behind my back.